Okay. Looks like we are in. Hi everybody. Welcome to today's session of UPSC Buffet by Gallant IAS. Today we'll be discussing the modern history portion from the 2024 PYQ. But at the same time, I'll be giving you some insights on the core themes that has been repeatedly asked in the last 5 years. We can see a clear pattern on how UPSC is been asking, the kind of areas that UPSC focuses the most, so that you can actually put emphasis on your studies and learn those areas correctly and can actually get almost all the questions right from the modern history portion. And like I said, the number of questions from modern history has seen a decline in its numbers. Starting from 2021, we had almost 10 questions. Prior to that, we used to get around 10 to 12 questions. And post that, there has been a strategic decline, like 10 became 6 in 2022. Then it became, again stand roughly around 5 to 6 questions in 2023. And effectively, it got reduced to almost 3 questions because one question has been cancelled. In total, 4 questions has been asked, and it has been reduced to 3 questions effectively because the question has been cancelled. But the themes remained very consistent. This is a very good thing for us aspirants because we can approach a subject that is as vast as modern history, and we can actually reduce it into these 4 headers and put our focus on these things, and then build our base as usual and put our focus on these areas and try to do more questions and learn more about these areas, and we can actually get almost all the questions right. So that's a very good thing. That's a very good trend UPSC is following. If you can catch that trend, modern history is a cakewalk. Okay, so keep that in mind. So be very confident. If you feel like you're somebody who's struggling with modern history, don't be alarmed at all. I am reassuring you because this is the only areas that currently UPSC is focusing on. Maybe 1 or 2 extra areas will come, but the core core area that UPSC is most interested in is around these 4 areas. That's what I've inferred from the last 5-year question. I know there are areas that are outside this that has been asked, but getting these areas right can actually get you most of the questions right. At least, like if 4 questions has been asked, you can get 2 to 3 questions sure shot right. So that's a very good win for a subject like modern history. So that's a very good start. So these are the 4 key headers that I've observed that UPSC has been asking since 2020 to 2024. Also 25 was an extension of this, but we are not going to discuss about 25 right now. We are discussing up until 2024. So we could clearly see that question on colonial settlements has been asking repeatedly. If you have been following this channel and our discussion on modern history, you can see that every year there will be a question, whether it be Portuguese, Dutch or East India companies, their settlements, from which kingdom they have leased their land or from which kingdom they have captured it, those sort of questions. So colonial settlements, early colonial settlements are very important, and there is a clear pattern to that also. Vijayanagara, very important, at least 1 question, guaranteed 1 question from Vijayanagara every year. So that's very important. Then Constituent Assembly. Of late, Constituent Assembly is gathering more momentum, and it is mostly linked with Cripps mission and other missions also. But the core idea surrounds around Constituent Assembly only. Some very factual question has been asked in 2024 about the Constituent Assembly, which is a slight deviation from the usual trend. And of course, British Acts and Intervention, mainly the Charter Act, the 1909 Act, 1919 Act and 1935 Act. Along with their land reforms, land revenue systems, etc. So these still remain important. So a clear pattern you can observe is that the INC phase of the Indian national movement, the questions are not being asked of late. So that's one thing to remember. So you don't have to spend that much time on remembering the sessions, everything in detail. But few things are important when it comes to the Constituent Assembly and things like that. So I'll tell you how to approach these questions, how to plan your studies, as well as take cues from the PYQs so that you can actually plan your portions likewise, and give due importance to the most important portions, and give little time and effort to the portions that have not been frequently asked. That's how you study something very smart in a limited time. So these are the key areas. I hope you can see it. These are the key areas based on the last 4 years up until 2024. The first question that we are discussing is, who of the following rulers of medieval India gave permission to Portuguese to build a fort in Batkal? Okay, first thing we need to be knowing is anyway, if you are having any connection with the settlements, if you know about the timeline, then it's very easy. We can decipher that. But we cannot remember the timeline of each and every ruler, especially if they are from not very known or not a very popular dynasty that we study in our books. That's one thing. Then secondly, you need to be identifying the region. If the name is given, and you should be able to identify which region or which this place belongs to which region or which state in current age. So that's the two way we can actually decipher this question using fact. But other than that, there are other ways in which you can do it. One sure short thing that I always tell you is that questions about Vijayanagara is almost always important, and there are two important rulers in Vijayanagara, Devaraya 1 and Devaraya 2. And if in options any of their names comes up, most likely that will be the right answer. But I'm not saying it because don't take it like a blind logic, because UPSC is giving due importance to Vijayanagara Empire, especially the prime rulers of the Vijayanagara Empire, and that's the reason why the answers are mostly Krishnadevaraya or Devaraya 1 or 2. That's the reason. Okay, don't think that whatever question that is being asked about Vijayanagara, the answer will be Krishnadevaraya. It's not the case, but generally that's the trend. Okay, so if you are absolutely having no clue and you have got Krishnadevaraya or Devaraya mentioned in options, there is a good chance that such a thing will be there, especially if that is regarding any progressive construction, any artistic intervention, or any agricultural development, irrigation, land consolidation, things like that. So Vijayanagara is a very progressive empire. We have seen that. So that's one thing you need to be knowing. So for this question, the answer is Krishnadevaraya. And actually, while attending this examination, I didn't know exactly whether it's Krishnadevaraya or anybody else. But since it was saying that the rulers who give permission to Portuguese, because the rulers, the Bahmani or the Bijapur Sultanates, they didn't actually give permission. I assume these two rulers are from Bahmani or like Bijapur Sultanates, and there's a good chance that they won't be giving permission. So Portuguese most likely would have annexed the properties or territories from them. That's the usual trend, because last year in 2023 there has been a question about who captured Diu from, Portuguese captured Diu from which ruler, and it was Bahadur Shah. So given that logic, we understand that usually the Mughal subsidiaries or Mughal vassal empires, they don't usually give permission for Portuguese, especially Portuguese or East India Company for that matter. They are usually taken by conquest only. So from that option, and since the permission is given, I thought these two won't be there. And I was left with Narasimha, Saluva and Krishnadevaraya. And from the name Saluva, I could figure out that he is also a king in Vijayanagara Empire, because Saluva, Tuluva, Sangama are all subclasses of Vijayanagara Empire clans. So this answer should be between these two. And since Krishnadevaraya is one popular and very powerful leader, and he is very open and very inclusive, he might have given the permission to Portuguese to build a fort in Bhatkal for administrative reasons, and especially he is facing threats from all the ends. So there is a good chance that he will be giving Portuguese the permission for that. So I thought of taking the answer as Krishnadevaraya, and that was the answer. This particular question actually combines two of the core themes that has been asked. One is colonial settlements and Vijayanagara. So we need to look into the previous year questions, like in 4 years prior to that, which are surrounding these colonial settlements and Vijayanagara. So we get the idea about how these themes are being asked by UPSC. Let's start with the colonial settlements. In 2022, this is a question that we already discussed, but again I'm putting into perspective how these are being asked. In 2022, UPSC have asked about colonial settlement. In the theme of colonial settlement, they have asked that Dutch established their factories and warehouses on east coast, lands granted to them by Gajapati rulers. And I have told you that Gajapati rulers, their rule ended before the Dutch has arrived. And Alfonso Albuquerque captured Goa from Bijapur Sultanate. This is what I have told you. Capturing mostly, issues like Portuguese and the Sultanates doesn't go well together. So there is a very less chance that land permission is given. Usually those territories of Sultanates will be captured by the Portuguese. That's one thing you need to remember. And same way, Diu was also captured from another Bahadur Shah. So that's also another thing. So this is again a trend that we can observe. An English East India Company established a factory at Madras on a plot of land leased from representative of Vijayanagara Empire. So this was a question asked in 2022. This is the wrong statement and these two are the right statements, and we can arrive at the answer as B. Okay, so that's the basic idea. And next one, see, in 2021, a question about East India Company settlement is asked. And again, I told you that it is in the first quarter of 17th century. That means the British are just setting their foot into the Indian subcontinent. And we can, if you know, they come from the western coast. So there is a good chance that they will be starting from the western coast and slowly moving towards the eastern coast. That's how they approach. Whereas the Dutch came from the eastern coast because they had their bases in Malay Peninsula. So that's the two different ways in which Dutch and English has approached India. Also Portuguese also approached India via the western route. Okay, remember that. So I knew that Bharuch is a possible thing because it's Bharuch, it's in Gujarat coast. So they could have set their base there. And Srikakulam and Tiruchirappalli are both in the eastern side of things. So these two are having a lesser chance because the first quarter of 17th century, that is when the British are actually setting foot. At a later stage, you know, these territories may have been occupied by East India Company, but in the initial phase, they came in the western part and starting with Surat and Bharuch. So there is a good chance that these two won't be there. So that's how I arrived at the answer as A. Okay, so you get the idea. We are, assessing. We are not just factually eliminating things. We are more qualitatively assessing it because English East India Company came from the west, Dutch came from the east. So first quarter of 17th century, that is when they actually set foot. So the good chance is that their bases will be located in that area initially. Then they move on to other bases. That's one approach. And again, for this question, the Bijapur Sultanate, we know that, from the Sultanates, because of their Mughal allegiance, they are having a very hostile relationship with the Portuguese. And Portuguese are, in general, very hostile, and they used their firepower and their, firepower to conquer the territories rather than, administrative or diplomatic measures. So there is a good chance that capturing of territories from Sultanates is a very possible thing. So that's also one more thing. These are the few things that you can remember. So if any question comes up, you can apply a combination of these logic and arrive at the answer. Again, in 2023, same way, colonial settlement. Who among the following rulers of medieval Gujarat surrendered due to Portuguese? Again, I told you, these sultanates will be having a conflict with Portuguese, and there is no permission of sort will be happening. Mostly military conquest, and at the end, Portuguese will be annexing their territories. And the answer is Bahadur Shah. So that's also another question that is been asked. See, in 2023, 2021, 2022, like continuously for 3 years, they have asked this question, colonial settlements. And in 2024, another question has been asked. And this time it is linked with Vijayanagara. See, that's how the trend is there. So it's more imperative on our side to learn about these things. And I have made a comprehensive list based on the PYQs and the questions that we could expect in the upcoming years based on this initial conquest or initial permissions given to settlement. So first one, acquisition of lands by colonial powers. This is the chart I have made. It's a very handy chart. You can refer to it and you can easily solve the questions with these. So the colonial power will be Portuguese. The Goa, that is captured from Bijapur Sultanate. Okay, remember. Diu from Bahadur Shah and Goa from Bijapur Sultanate. And who was the ruler? Adil Shah. So if you have Adil Shah mentioned in DU, you can eliminate that. Okay. So that's it. Western coast by force. Again, it was capturing, and it's from it's a military conquest. Then DU, then Sultan Bahadur Shah, okay, of Gujarat, and treaty later fortified force. Again, forcefully they have annexed it. Then Cochin. Cochin was one exception because, like I said, apart from these sultanates, with other rulers, Portuguese had got an alliance or permission. They took the permission route for setting up their bases. In Cochin bases, when they set up, it was based on alliance and permission given on. And then British East India Company, they didn't initially set foot with a military conquest. They actually started off with a proper permission or royal firman from Jahangir, and later they engaged in usual conflict and conquest. Then Fort St. George in Madras, in Coromandel coast. See, they started off in Surat, then Bharuch, then later half of, like in the later quarter of 17th century, they moved towards the eastern side in the Madras, and it was given to them by Damarla Venkatappa Nayaka. From the name itself, we can say that he is a representative of Vijayanagara, and it was leased and granted, not annexed. Then British East India Company taking Bombay. It was a treaty, like a marriage dowry from the Portuguese crown. That has nothing to do with Indian rulers. So that's an exchange happening between the Portuguese and the British because of their marriage alliances. Dutch came from Pulicat because, like I told you, they came from the eastern coast. Local rulers of Vijayanagara legacy, same treaty and again treaty and trade. Denmark rulers, and they also came from the eastern coast. So Tanjavur Nayak and lease and treaty. Then French, Chandanagara in Bengal, they have got Mughal authorities, permission and grant. And French, Pondicherry, Pondicherry by the French, again by the permission. So Pondicherry didn't have any popular Vijayanagara or Mughal rulers or anything. They just had the local rulers. Okay, that's one thing to remember. And this is a comprehensive list you can use to actually understand how they have captured and which all territories these colonial powers have captured. So this gives you an idea. Try to make these tables so that you can easily look at the information, and just by a glance of it you can learn more things rather than reading it in passages. So that's one thing I highly recommend. So you may take a screenshot of this and you can use it later. So yeah, you may take a screenshot. I'll wait 3 seconds. And yeah, that's all. Moving on. Again, now we are moving into the Vijayanagara theme, the theme of Vijayanagara that is being asked. In 2023, this is a 2023 question. Who among the following rulers of Vijayanagara Empire constructed a large dam across Tungabhadra river and a canal cum aqueduct several kilometers long from the river to a capital city? Meaning that it's a irrigational masterpiece. It's a irrigational marvel they have constructed, and it's a very big achievement. So somebody who is as powerful, who need to be very powerful, should be doing that. And among the Vijayanagara Empire rulers, I told you that it's Devaraya I and Devaraya II are the most prominent and the powerful rulers, and they both have their own distinct qualities. Like Devaraya I were mostly associated with irrigation and consolidation of territories, and Devaraya II, he was he is actually credited with the cultural peak of Vijayanagara Empire as well as administrative efficiency. So think about that. So irrigation, consolidation, these are all associated with Devaraya I. So that's how the answer becomes Devaraya I. Okay. So that's the answer for this. Again, the question about Vijayanagara came in 2021. So according to the Portuguese writer Nunes, the women in Vijayanagara Empire were expert in which among the following areas? Like I told you, we won't be reading the account of Nunes. There is a very less chance. This might be given in NCRTs or Tamil Nadu SCRTs, but you might have missed it. But it's not required that you don't have to learn everything that in which all areas that women were engaged in, things like that. If you have a qualitative idea that Vijayanagara is a progressive empire, you can easily arrive at the answer. So in a progressive empire, women will be very much active in very much active in the social sphere and the economic sphere. So in that perspective, soothsaying, it's very much possible. Accounting, astrology, wrestling is one thing that may seem less likely, given that age. But Vijayanagara is a very progressive empire. Women did have their own strong participation in the social sphere. So this is highly likely because it's Vijayanagara Empire. Had it been any other empire, we need to recheck. So if you are learning about any empire, you need to qualitatively assess its traits, like how progressive they were, what was the role of women, like what was the status of women, how tolerant those rulers were, and what was the major religions they patronized by the rulers, etc. So these are the key areas that you have to have an idea about any kingdom. Don't just go behind learning everything about them, learning about their entire lineage, their wars, conquest, everything. Mostly, have a classification, a profiling based on these criteria, like the progressiveness, role of women, tolerance, and the major religions patronized, as well as the architectural work. So these are the 5 areas important for any empire that UPSC wants you to know. So don't just go behind the core facts and rough facts, just have a qualitative idea about all of this. So we can easily arrive at the answer as D. I think most of the veteran aspirants who might not even have revised any of this would have chosen D because they knew that Vijayanagara Empire is a progressive empire, and that logic itself is more than sufficient to solve this question. Again, in 2024, that's all about Vijayanagara Empire and early colonial settlements. Then we should be moving into the second part, that is the Constituent Assembly. This has taken up a limelight recently, because most of the questions are being asked about Constituent Assembly, that is connected to Cripps mission, August offer, things like that. So we'll look into how these questions are asked about Constituent Assembly. The core area remains same, Constituent Assembly only, but you need to be studying things in such a way that you should be able to answer questions like this. Okay, so this was very factual and quite unexpected, but UPSC has been giving you hints that Constituent Assembly is very important. It's a very important portion of modern history, and we will be asking question about that since 2021. So UPSC has been giving you hints. So it's expected for you to have a very good factual understanding about Constituent Assembly, and that's why this question popped up in 2024. The question is, who was the provisional president of Constituent Assembly before Dr. Rajendra Prasad took over? And there is a slight difficulty in eliminating it, but we can eliminate Dr. B.R. Ambedkar because we know that he is a chairman of drafting committee. Then C. Rajagopalachari, he was the first Governor General of Independent India, so doesn't really have he doesn't really have that office or that role as the provisional president. Then we are stuck with Krishnamacharya and Sachidananda Sinha. And if you have heard about Sachidananda Sinha, that he is the first deputy speaker of the Central Legislative Assembly, and he was one of the oldest members of the Constituent Assembly. We can say that in honoring his his stature, they might have given this thing to Sachidananda Sinha. Okay, that's one way to logically approach it and arrive at the answer. And if you know the fact, it's well and good. That's it. So anyways, I'll be discussing few important facts about Constituent Assembly so that you can be better equipped when solving questions about Constituent Assembly. We'll look into another question about Constituent Assembly asked just a year back, but this was a fairly easy one. This was testing your how observant you are. Nothing factual was being discussed here, or it may appear very factual, but UPSC was focusing on how observant and how careful you are, because the question is fairly simple. The Constitution Day is celebrated on 26 November every year to promote constitutional values amongst citizens. You know that Constitutional Day is celebrated in 26 November. Yes. That's a known fact. Okay. Even if you don't know, fine. On 26 November 1949, the Constituent Assembly of India set up drafting committee under chairmanship of B.R. Ambedkar to prepare a draft constitution. Yeah, Constitutional Assembly set up a drafting committee to make the constitution under the chairmanship of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. That is true. That part is true. But did it happen on 1949 November 26? What happened on 1949 November 26? Okay, just remember that in 1950 January 26 we became a republic, meaning that we enacted the Indian Constitution and India became a proper republic. And look at the timeline. In 1950 January 26, just 2 months. And in these 2 months, can they set up a Constituent Assembly and have a proper constitution by that time? Drafting the constitution, debating it, everything. You know, our constitution is the largest written constitution and it took almost 2 years to complete. So this is not the case. If you can connect it with the Republic Day or the first Republic Day, and you can easily get that this is not the right answer. This is actually, the date actually represents the date in which the constitution was adopted. And due to ceremonial reason, despite the fact that we had a working constitution and we adopted it on 26 November, and it was properly enacted in January 26, 1950, and that's when we became a republic, and that's why we celebrate a Republic Day. And why we choose 26 January as the Republic Day? Because it was in order to honor the previous Purna Swaraj resolution in Lahore session 1929, where 26 January was chosen as the Independence Day. So in order to honor that, we waited for 2 more months, 3 more months, and 2 more months actually, 2 more months, and properly adopted the constitution in January 26, 1950. It was purely a ceremonial reason, because the date January 26 had significance ceremonially, because it was the date envisioned in the Purna Swaraj resolution to celebrate as the Independence Day. So that's all about it. And I really hope you understand what does it mean to be an independent nation and a republic. A nation can be independent if it is free of external powers. But in order for it to become a republic, you need to have an elected head of the state. So we had the president as the elected head of the state. So that's how India became a republic. Okay, that's one thing you need to remember. And few dates I'll tell you, few important personalities I'll discuss. So first of all, the dates. And the drafting committee was set up in 29 August. I told you, it took almost 2 years to complete the constitution. Of course, that's such a big document, and you need to take into account a lot of things. You need to, have a debate on articles, and every single article was divided clause by clause by the Constituent Assembly. So such a lengthy process had to be taken place. So it took almost 2 years, and it was started in 29 August 1947. So in this place, this should have been 29 August 1947. Okay, that's the wrong thing. If 29 August 1947 was given, this would have been the right statement. Then Constitution was adopted. I told you, it was adopted in 26 November. That's why we celebrate it as Constitution Day. And Constitution came into force in 26 January 1950. And then India became a republic based on that Constitution. Okay. So that's all about it. And again, what happened on why 26 January? Because it was chosen to honor the Purna Swaraj Declaration. Okay. That's one important fact you need to remember. And it was celebrated as Independence Day across the country on 1930 itself. So to honor that legacy, we just held back on our constitution enactment, and we waited for 2 more months and enacted it. So that's all about the dates. Remember these dates, okay? These are important, and just have a rough idea. And since the answer for this particular question is Sachidananda Sinha, and I've always told you, the options that UPSC has been given, especially the right ones, will be repeated. Okay, so it's worth looking into these options and learning something about it, because what if UPSC is asking something in the upcoming years that has got personalities like these, and Sachidananda Sinha is also there. So having an idea about Sachidananda Sinha can actually help you eliminate few of the options, or if choose the right answer. There is few major achievements about Sachidananda Sinha. He actually died in 1950, so he was really old by that time. He was born in 1870 and died in 1950. So by the time India became a republic, he was dead. Okay, like after India becoming a republic, he was dead. So he was a very old member of that Constituent Assembly, and that's why he was the provisional president before Rajendra Prasad took over. And he was a barrister, politician, journalist. Of course, we know most of them were experts in law. And the important thing is, he was a member of Imperial Legislative Council. Okay, that's the Central Legislative Council in 1910 to 1920. That's one important thing. And he was the first deputy president of Central Legislative Assembly. Again, very important. First deputy president as in deputy speaker of the Central Legislative Assembly. And he was the temporary chairman of Constituent Assembly. That's one that we have discussed. And he was also vice chancellor of Patna University. And he played a key role in separate Bihar province from Bengal. Okay, remember this. He played a key role in separation of Bihar province from Bengal. And he was a founder of Sinha Library in Patna. That's all. So these are the few things about Sachidananda Sinha. Remember this. He was the first deputy speaker of Central Legislative Assembly. This can be a potential question. Given, UPSC usually asks giving descriptions about personalities, and you can have Sachidananda Sinha's name in that. So if something like first deputy president of Central Legislative Assembly is given, then you can actually arrive at the answer. So taking inspiration from that logic, and UPSC have already asked questions based on personalities, let's take a look into some personalities. We cannot discuss everybody at a glance, but the kind of trend that UPSC has been going is mostly regarded with the legislative and constitutional posts in the pre-independence era. So let's take a look at it. First and temporary president of Constituent Assembly, like I said, Sachidananda Sinha, he was the oldest member. Then president of Constituent Assembly was Rajendra Prasad. We discussed earlier. Chairman of drafting committee, everybody knows, it's B.R. Ambedkar. Don't confuse it. First speaker of Central Legislative Assembly is Frederick White. It's not Sachidananda Sinha. Okay, remember that. He was the first deputy speaker of Central Legislative Assembly. Okay. First speaker was Frederick White, of course a British person. And first deputy speaker was Sachidananda Sinha. Remember that. Okay, it happened in 1921. And also, first Indian speaker of Central Legislative Assembly. First Indian speaker was Vithalbhai Patel. This is also one important fact to remember. So first speaker was Frederick White. First Indian speaker was Vithalbhai Patel. First deputy speaker was Sachidananda Sinha. And few more things. First president we know Rajendra Prasad. First vice president Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan. Remember, of course, Prime Minister we all know. And last Governor General was Rajagopalachari. Some might miss on this fact, but okay, learn it now, that's all. I don't recommend you learning everything about everybody, like the first president, last president, everything. That's not very required. But positions like these, especially surrounding the Constituent Assembly and the Central Legislative Assembly prior independence, the pre-independent Central Legislative Assembly is somewhat important. So that's why I asked you to remember this. Especially this Vithalbhai Patel is a key personality in that aspect. And also few important things regarding INC also it's worth remembering, because J.B. Kripalani was the president at the time of independence. Okay, that's also one more thing. And Quit India movement is very relevant, and we have seen multiple questions connecting Quit India movement, especially about the date in which Quit India movement was adopted. It was asked in 2021, I guess, or 2022. Then Crips mission connecting with Quit India mission, things like that are being asked. So Quit India movement is very important, and that's why I told, that's why I picked up this name. Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad was the president during the time of Quit India movement, INC president during that time. And he is the longest serving INC president. And president during Lahore session, Jawaharlal Nehru, Purna Swaraj declaration, again connected to the Constituent Assembly. That's why I took the name of these INC presidents. Otherwise, it's not that important to remember, but if you are studying it, it's well and good. But questions surrounding INC presidentship is not usually asked these days. Okay. And that's all about the important personalities and the kind of questions that we are getting, especially in the backdrop of Constituent Assembly. Okay, let's look into other areas like members of drafting committee. This is also one thing you need to be knowing. Okay, so that's B.R. Ambedkar, chairman, and Nalladi Krishnaswamy Iyer, K.M. Munshi, Gopal Swami Iyengar, Muhammad Sadullah, B.L. Mittar, and D.P. Khaitan. These were the members of drafting committee. Try to remember these names, because we might know about B.R. Ambedkar, K.M. Munshi, but rest of the names are not that popular and we might forget it. So B.L. Mittar and D.P. Khaitan, it's worth remembering so that we can eliminate it, because UPSC may give names of these lesser known members of drafting committee and give options like what's the connection between these three. So it's imperative on us to study that. So that's all about it. Then comes the most important thing, the British Acts and Intervention. This is a slightly lengthy area because a lot of acts has been there under British, especially starting from the Charter Act to the modern acts. But UPSC has been focusing mostly around the 1919 and 1935 Act, and post that Crips mission, things like that are being asked, but the focus is mostly surrounding 1919 and 1935 Act. So pay close attention to those acts. Let's look at this question. With reference to Government of India Act of 1935, consider the following statements. It provided for establishment of an All India Federation based on union of British Indian provinces and princely states. This is actually the first thing. I think this is the first provision when you study about Government of India Act of 1935. This is the very first provision. Defence and foreign affairs were kept under the control of Federal Legislature. Defence and foreign affairs. British were reluctant up until the last moment to give up on these portfolios. Defense and foreign affairs were the ones that they wanted to keep it to themselves until the last moment, until that even in the Mountbatten plan also they were like slowly pushing it away. So this is not at all a possible thing, especially in 1935 where they had a strong grip over the Indian subcontinent. Even when they had a limited control, or they had their power losing, they didn't give up on these portfolios because they know the significance of this portfolio. So that was not kept under the control of Federal Legislature. It was exclusively vested with the Viceroy. So this was wrong, and we'll arrive at the answer as A. So that's all about 1935 Act, but it is asked in 2024. Fairly direct, fairly simple, but logically we can easily arrive at we can easily eliminate this. Even if you don't know factually, we can easily eliminate this. Again, we look into the trend in 2022. Similar thing, similar idea, similar logic. In 2022, regarding 1919 Act, it was asking about reserved and transferred subject. And from the name itself, you know that reserved subject are reserved for the Executive Council, whereas the transferred subjects are transferred for the elected government. So this will be governed by the governor at provincial level, meaning that the British will be having the exclusive power over these subjects, and transferred power will be handled by the elected members, the legislative assembly at the provincial level. So this will be having, subjects in these areas will be regarding day-to-day administration. Critical important subjects will be mostly kept in the reserves list, because British obviously want to keep the control of it. And look at the timeline, it's in 1990. Obviously we are very far away from being an independent nation. British are still very powerful, so we can easily get the idea about what sort of power arrangement was happening back then. So which all subjects are possible to be treated as a reserved one? Will police be treated as a reserved subject or a transferred subject? Reserved meaning the British will be keeping it for themselves to exert maximum control. So will the police be kept in a transferred subject and made accountable or made under the control of the elected representative of the provinces? Absolutely no chance. Police will be definitely be kept in their control only. So that's one thing that we can actually select. So options without 4 we can eliminate. This is not the way. Options without 4 we can eliminate. Then local self-government, land revenue. Do you think land revenue they are willing to devolve that right to collect the land revenue to the transfer list? Obviously no, they won't be giving that. So options without that will be gone. So we are left with 2, 3, 4, 1, 3, 4. Among administration of justice and local self-government, which seems more likely? Obviously, local self-government is one area where British will be least interested in, because that doesn't really have a long-standing impact on them. Local administration is like, irrigation, things like that. Okay, they will be like, okay, take the headache away. Okay, we'll focus on more powerful and important things. You do your thing. So it's like making them happy and, seeming them, making them feel like they are the good people. But that's not the case. So local self-government won't be there. It won't be treated as a reserved subject, and we can easily arrive at the answer. Police, land revenue, administration of justice, key areas of administration, they will be keeping that in the reserved subject, especially in 1919. For this, you don't need to learn everything that is given in the reserved or transferred subject. All you need is logic. It's very easy, very doable. Even if it's only 1, only 2, you can easily solve this question and arrive at the answer. This is why I tell you, whatever you are learning in modern history, try to have a qualitative assessment, especially in the backdrop. Like imagine the power situation happening there in 1919, how powerful British were, what were the approach, what was their attitude towards Indians, and how discriminative or how reserved they were when it comes to sharing powers with Indians, things like that. So that's one way to solve this question. I don't think any other way to solve this question. I don't think anybody will be reading about these reserved and transferred list, because even in polity, we are not delving deep into our own union list or concurrent list, and there is less chance that we will be dealing into the reserved or transferred subject in that era. So logic is the only way to go. Again, in 2021, I told you, like 1919 Act and 1935 Act are their favorite. In 2024, 35 have been asked. In 22, 19 has been asked. In 1921, like both 1935 and 1919 has been clubbed and asked. So again and again the question has been coming from 1919 and 1935. So keep that in mind. Montagu-Chelmsford reforms recommended granting voting rights to all the women above age of 21. First of all, India didn't have a universal adult franchise up until 1950. That's the key idea, that India was very late to the party. We got a universal adult franchise only after becoming a republic. So in 1919, granting voting rights to all women, absolutely no chance. Government of India Act 1935 gave women reserved seats. Yeah. With every act starting from 1909, reservation and separate electorate has been introduced, and this was slowly increased. In 1909, separate electorate for Muslims were introduced. In 1919, it was expanded to Anglo-Indians, Sikhs, etc. In 1935, women were also given reservations, provisions like that. So this is fairly possible, and this is the right answer. So learn all these acts: 1919, 1909. Minto-Morley Reform or Indian Council Act of 1999 or Government of India Act of 1919, that is the Montagu-Chelmsford Reform, and Government of India Act of 1935. Comparatively learn it, because every act is an increment over the other in terms of numbers of Indians in the Executive Council, keeping the official majority, things like that. So make a comparative list and learn it, and make a qualitative assessment also. And it's worth noting who all could vote, like the general trend of voting in India. It's worth knowing because this has got slight application polity as well. In 1900, absolutely nobody could vote. It was fairly a nomination process. And in 1909 Act, elite minorities could vote. This is the first time in Minto-Morley reforms, voting has been introduced. And only elite minorities, those who are educated, those who had this much of property, were eligible to vote. And now that may seem like a very alien process, or why is there not given the vote? Because that's the basic idea about this capitalistic approach, because they think that giving voting rights to everybody, meaning that not everybody needs voting right. That's the basic idea. Not everybody is equal. Only the educated ones, the wealthy ones, they should be having a say. That was the kind of attitude the British had, because British could easily appeal to these people, but they cannot appeal to normal workers, agriculturalists, etc. So they didn't want them to have a voting right and to elect, to exercise their franchise and elect somebody who would oppose the British. So they were keeping the voting rights to a minimal numbers and to elite minorities. In 1909 Act, it was expanded, but again, it was not a universal thing. It was expanded with slight relaxation in property, like having property or education, things like that. In 1935 Act, we had the maximum number of voters. About 14% of the population had vote. This was the maximum under the British rule. So this is far from being universal. Like 86% of the population didn't have vote. So this was the maximum under British rule, and it was only after 1950 all adults, a proper universal adult franchise was adopted by India. So this is the history of voting in India. It's worth knowing. And one more thing to remember, Sri Lanka is the country that has got first universal adult franchise in Asia. Sorry. In 1921, Sri Lanka has got universal adult franchise, adopted universal adult franchise in 1921. It's the first country, I think, in Asia to adopt that. Okay. So India is nowhere close to that. India got universal adult franchise in 1950 only. Then again another regarding the British Act. It was regarding Cribb's proposal. But this Cribb's proposal is also connected to the Constituent Assembly. Again, in 2022, we are getting another question about Constituent Assembly. See, Constituent Assembly, 1919 Act, 1935 Act. See how many times these have been repeatedly asked. So many questions, like in 21, 22, 23, in multiple formats. The area remains very simple. And Constituent Assembly is one very simple area to study also. And if you can study these acts also, it's very simple. So you can expect a short question and make it right. That is such a low-hanging fruit, and don't miss it. Okay. The structured approach, you can easily master this modern history questions, and 4 to 5 questions that modern history is giving you. It's a very low-hanging fruit. With right effort, you can get them right, and that gives you the freedom to make mistakes in other areas. So that's focus more on modern history in a way that don't go into the depth. Focus these areas, like the repeated areas, and make the best out of it. Cribb's mission. This is also, I have already discussed this question. I am just putting this into perspective. Okay, 2022 PYQ. It is connecting Cribb's mission to Constituent Assembly. So Constituent Assembly would have members nominated by provincial assemblies as well as princely states. This is slightly tricky because you need to be very careful. At first sight, this may seem very right only. But the issue is that provincial assemblies, members were not nominated. They were elected because they already had a provincial assembly. So they could elect members from themselves. Okay, not people are voting to the members of Constituent Assembly. Remember that. Okay, Constituent Assembly is like the first legislature, but we are not directly electing the members to the Constituent Assembly. The members of the provincial assemblies, within them an election is conducted, and they become the members of Constituent Assembly, more like the election of Rajya Sabha. Okay, so remember that we didn't directly elect the members of provincial assembly. So not provincial assembly, Constituent Assembly, and they were not nominated, they were elected, and nomination was there for princely states. So that's why this statement becomes wrong, because nomination was for princely states and it was election that was for provincial assemblies. Any province which is not prepared to accept the new constitution would have the right to sign a separate agreement with regarding. Yeah, this is true. Britain was absolutely not concerned with secession or balkanization of India. They wanted their power to be there in place, they want to win the war, especially in 1942 Kriegsmission mission. They were fighting a war against Nazi Germany, so they were not really winning the war at that point. So they wanted Indian support, so they didn't bother much about keeping India in a one piece, and that's definitely not in their interest. If at all they want is India to be in a balkanized state so that it's easy to control them. So this is the right thing, and that's all the answer. So that's all about it, about modern history. So I really hope you understand the kind of questions that are being asked. It's mostly boiled down to these four ideas. I'm not saying that these are all comprehensive and you have to study only this much, but I'm saying that the pattern is very clear, very evident, that these four areas are very essential, and you can expect questions from these every year. Whether irrespective of the kind of questions being asked, you can expect a question from this area. And these areas are not that large, and especially about Vijayanagara, I don't recommend you learn everything, every ruler, and every ruler, everything. No, focus more on Devaraya 1 and 2, and also any other things about Vijayanagara, the social structure of Vijayanagara, etc. And about colonial settlements, I think you may build make a table like this and add any information based on the PYQs. Okay, these are the questions that has been already asked, and about Portuguese Diu, and then Goa, Bijapur Sultanate. This has already been asked. So questions like this, you take cues and make a table and learn it. That's how you can approach the first one, the colonial settlements. So making a table is the most easiest way to do it. And British Act and interventions, of course, the 1919, 1935 acts are the most important ones, along with 1909 Act also. So focus more on that. Okay. So that's all about it. I really hope you understood, how these questions are being repeatedly asked and a core theme is being formed. So I highly recommend you focus more on modern history in a structured way, do a smart work on that, and don't go into the details and tire yourself out. So that's all about it. Happy learning and see you soon.